And I want to welcome everyone to the Western Institute for Social Research, a premier academic institute for social change since 1975. This is our new home, and for those who haven't seen it yet, and today's event is the first in this new location. WISR provides community-involved adults with high-quality, affordable, personalized, learner-centered online graduate education with an emphasis on action-oriented inquiry that combines theory and practice to achieve community improvement, education, innovation, and social justice. Today, civil rights activist and author Jake Sloan joined WISR's president, Dr. John Bilorusky, for an in-depth conversation about his book, Standing Tall, Willie Long versus the U.S. government at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard, the publishing process, and his challenges promoting racial justice, equal access and equality in training and pay for African Americans in the construction building trades. I'm Mark Corbett Wilson, WISR's Learning Experience Design technologian, and I recently became the third person to achieve the Canadian Certificate of Digital Humanities and was involved in the design, editing, publishing, and now publicizing of Standing Tall. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that Berkeley sits on the territory of the Wichin, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Chichone Ohlone, the successors of the historic Verona Band of Alameda County. And hello from El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de Los Angeles, the American city with the longest and the shortest names, LA. I'm in nearby Whittier, California, and respectfully acknowledge the Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tova Angar. I also recognize this land, now known as LA County, is home to more Native Americans than any other county in the United States. For those online, please ask your questions in the chat, and I'll relay them later in the conversation. John Bilorusky has a PhD in higher education from UC Berkeley and is president of the Western Institute for Social Research. He was a co-founder of WISR in 1975 and has served full-time on WISR's faculty ever since. Routledge published John's books, Principles and Methods of Transformative Action Research and Cases and Stories of Transformative Action Research in 2021. Jake Sloan has an MA in history from San Francisco State University and has spent most of his adult life working in the areas of civil rights and affirmative action, advocating and fighting for opportunity and income equality for African Americans. History Press, an imprint of Arcadia Publishing, reissued Jake's Standing Tall, Willie Long versus the U.S. government at Mare Island Naval Shipyard last year. So, Jake, if you could start us off with just a little background about why you wrote Standing Tall.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In 1960, there were approximately 1,000 African Americans working at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo. Those men had, most of them were men, and the men had worked for many years under conditions of extreme discrimination in hiring, training, promotions, and lack of equal pay at the Naval Shipyard. Increasingly, there was dissatisfaction with that. Many people, including myself, thought that working at Mare Island was a good job. If you were a veteran, like I was, you received paid vacations, sick leave, and various other benefits, and the opportunity to one day have a nice retirement. But as you looked around, there was a problem, and it's what I call a lack of balance. Part of the discrimination was the lack of opportunity for promotions. So of the 1,000 African Americans working at the Naval Shipyard at that time, only 2 were supervisors. And they were not in the production shops, they were in the shops that were basically laborers. Obviously, that was an imbalance. And I had experienced that in the Army, which I was in as a very young man, where when I was in the Army for 3 years, I saw one African-American officer that I worked with, and only 3 total. And I served in the United States and Europe for 3 years. So I had seen that imbalance before. So I was sympathetic to the guys who wanted to do something about it. I hadn't directly been discriminated against because I'd only been there a short time, and I was not considered the best worker on the shipyard, so I didn't expect to get any promotions right away. But increasingly, the dissatisfaction led to the desire to do something about it, for lack of a better way to put it. And there was a man there by the name of Willie Long. I call him the Great Willie Long, who was extremely dissatisfied, and very dissatisfied about the way one person in particular had been treated, and that was John Edmondson, who had worked at the shipyard for more than 30 years, was considered the best pipe fitter on the shipyard out of 700 working in the pipe fitter's shop, and could not get a promotion to a leadership position. So Willie Long started to organize, and organizing was difficult because what was the standing thought at the shipyard was that the kind of treatment that we had to bear was normal, because many, if not most of the people who worked at the shipyard either came from the South or were influenced by parents or relatives from the South, and that included the African Americans. So in some cases, we had as much pushback from the African Americans as we did from the whites, because they didn't want to risk losing the good job. But that notwithstanding, 25 men ultimately came together to sign a complaint with the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity in Washington. That complaint was signed, and the story behind this book is what we experienced after signing that complaint. And I'm prepared to answer any questions starting here.
Jack, before you do that, could you talk a little bit more about the process that you went through doing oral histories with people? And you started that a number of years ago. A lot of the men have since passed away, but just a little bit about your process of inquiry. You experienced it firsthand, but then you wanted to get the perspectives of a lot of the other men to include in the book. And so could you talk about that as well?
Yes, and I was by far the youngest person to sign the complaint. And again, I was 21 at the time we signed the complaint. Most of the other men were in their 30s and 40s, and had a lot more to risk than I did, by the way, because they had families. I had no family, no obligations, and I could have always re-enlisted in the Army so that I could eat every day, so I didn't have the same challenge. But that notwithstanding, I saw the problem then, but not as clearly as I could see it later, because as Mark pointed out, I eventually left the shipyard and went to San Francisco State University and received a degree in history. And I started to think over the years that what we had done was historically important, maybe more important to me than what I learned about how Napoleon ruled the Low Countries. So I started thinking about that and how I could capture what had happened, because we didn't keep records, because one of the challenges we had was secrecy. If the leadership at Mare Island had discovered what we were doing, the ones who were not veterans would have been fired summarily. So there was a danger there. So we didn't keep records, and the secrecy was so important that only one of the men who signed the complaint ever mentioned it at home with his wife. We told no one what we were doing until after the complaint.
Which guy was that?
That was Williams. And so I thought about it, and then I didn't think about it. I was going through, I got married and had children, and trying to put food on the table, so I didn't think much about it. Willie Long, who was the leader of the group, eventually was forced out, because as life goes, after a while, the group thought he was too aggressive, was demanding too much. For example, they offered him a raise or a promotion, and he refused to take it unless they promoted all the 25 who signed the complaint. Well, that wasn't realistic because they had guys in the group like Jake Sloan, who wasn't really a good worker at that time. At that time, I didn't deserve a promotion, and I knew it. I mean, later I would get a promotion, but by then I deserved it. So Willie left the island very bitter because of what had happened and moved to Madeira to start a business. So many years after the signing took place, which was 1961, in 1980, I went down to Madeira to interview Willie about what had happened.
20 years later?
More than 20. Maybe.
19.
Yeah, 19 years. And I thought at the time that since I had studied history, I knew enough to be able to ask the right questions and maybe put it in perspective. So I interviewed Willie, and that interview still exists, part of it. But after that, again, I dropped it. So only about 40 years after the action took place, I got serious and decided that I was going to write it. And by that time, of the 25 who originally signed it, only 8 were left. So I started to interview them and interview their families and interview other non-African Americans who worked at the shipyard to try to pull the story together. And it was difficult for me because, again, by that time I was married, had children, and was working, so it was a part-time thing. It took me 10 years to write, writing when I was traveling on a plane. I would write some. I went to the University of Michigan to review the papers of the guy who was the legal counsel for the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity.
I went to University of Michigan.
Yeah, right. I went to a great library there. But I couldn't find the proof that I was looking for because Willie and the guys always said that we influenced the language of the Civil Rights Act. The guy who was the legal advisor was one of the leaders in writing the Civil Rights Act. So I thought I could find the proof there. I didn't. I believe it influenced it. Others believe it influenced it, but I could never prove it. So anyway, that process went on, as I said, for 10 years. I interviewed not only the men who were participants, but I interviewed Willie Long's wife. He was gone by then. I interviewed the other wives. Clarence Williams was the one who talked with his wife about it. Mm-hmm. I interviewed all of those and others who worked at the shipyard at the same time, but refused to sign the complaint. And I wanted to know why they wouldn't sign the complaint, because the difficulty of organizing was so bad that if people saw Willie Long coming, they ran away. They didn't want to be seen talking with him. Really? So I wanted to know why the guys wouldn't sign the complaint. And basically, they were afraid of losing their jobs. I understand that. And I understood it at the time. But at the time that we did it, I was very perplexed about why we could get only 25 men out of 1,000 to sign the complaint, but I know that in some way, every one of them was discriminated against.
But you also didn't try and recruit others. I mean, it was
Well, so we didn't recruit them if we didn't think we could trust them.
Yeah.
All of our meetings were held in secrecy. The meetings that we had on the shipyard were in secrecy. But there was a lot of carpooling at the time. And so the guys who carpooled, and I carpooled with the older guys, talked about what was happening on the way from Mare Island and back every day. We were carpooling. And that was the way we actually put the scheme together, how we were going to do it in secrecy. So it was a difficult process. And then, of course, to try to get a publisher to publish a book like that is not easy. So we finally wound up self-publishing. This is a publication that was done by a publisher, but this was 6 or 7 years after the first edition of this came out. So that was the difficulty of pulling the story together.
That's
Who's
great.
the publisher?
The publisher of this one?
Arcadia.
Are there two?
Well, there was one that was published in 2017, self-published by Bookbaby, was it?
Yeah, use book. Later part of the session, if people want, we can talk about the pros and cons of self-publishing, and WISR published a book, a collection of articles through Bookbaby. It has pros and cons, but right now we probably should continue to focus on Jake's book and the content. And I appreciate you telling the process, Jake, because it shows that, you know, sometimes a book like this, it was like almost not counting the time of the actual action. It was like 40 years in the making, so 1980 to 2020, roughly speaking.
1960.
Well, no, I said not counting the action, but from when he started to really, you know, thinking about doing the book. And it is a good example of oral histories and gathering oral histories and putting together a story after the fact, as well as your recollections from as a participant observer at the time, of course. Do you want to talk about any, I don't know if this is critical, but are there any several key issues that you encountered in the actual, I remember you and I met a number of times while you were actually writing, you know, putting paper to pen to paper or fingers to keyboard when you were actually writing it up. Were there a few crucial issues that you had to wrestle with about what to include or not to include in the book or how to frame it? Do you recall? I recall us talking a lot, but.
While I'm thinking about that, I want to say there are advantages and disadvantages to working with a publisher.
Okay, that's a different thing, but first I wanted to know, just in terms of the content of what you put in the book, were there any difficult decisions that you had or challenges?
I guess the most difficult was to deal with Willie Long's personality. He could be difficult, to say the least, because he was very aggressive. He wouldn't take no for an answer, really. And that aggressive personality caused him to have challenges at home.
That was the difficulty in the action,
Yeah.
but after the fact, in the writing about it, were there some issues that you had to wrestle with about what do I include, what don't I include, how do I frame it, that sort of thing?
Well, related to Willie's
It was
personality.
related with how much to
How
include
much
about
I
the,
wanna-
how much you want to talk. Okay, so say a little bit more about that. That I understand now.
Because there were different, obviously with 25 men, there were different personalities involved. Some of the guys were very religious, some of them were not so religious, including my group. And so we had to deal with that. But about Willie's personality, it was touchy because his wife was still alive, and he had children still alive. And so what I put into the book, I had to consider, I wanted to tell the truth, but I had to consider, you know, the human side of it.
Right.
Willie was a very, very difficult person, and his wife will admit that. So that was one. I think that, and the other one was to get the guys to get together, to get them to share the information with me that they had, because there was nothing in writing. And again, different kinds of personalities. Sometimes they wouldn't do an interview with me alone. They would demand that someone else be there. And it wasn't a matter of trust, because I had been with these guys since I was actually 19 years old. So they all knew me and they trusted me, but they were still sensitive about the matter of secrecy and the impact it may have on them.
Can you talk a little bit about John Edmondson's role, both in the book and in the action?
John Edmondson was, again, a person who had started at Mare Island in 1930 as an apprentice. And he became what was considered to be the best pipe fitter on the shipyard out of 700 pipe fitters. He and another guy were thought to be able to tear the piping on a ship or a submarine, take it out, and replace it by themselves. That's how good they were. And John was so good that he had trained many of the guys on the shipyard at that time who became supervisors, and he had to report to. So, and that really bothered Willie Long. So John was the inspiration for what we did. Because Willie had promised him that if he ever got a chance, he was going to do something about the way he was treated. So he was the inspiration. But this wasn't the first time that there was an attempt to organize. There had been attempts in the past, and they failed because John would organize them, And at the last minute, when he went up to the hills, Willie would say, he looked around and there was nobody behind him to support him. So he had no confidence that these guys were going to stick together this time. So he supported us spiritually, and he donated money to help pay the legal fees, but he wouldn't sign the complaint because he just didn't think we would stick together.
Edmondson?
John Edmondson.
So there's something that I learned from you when you were writing the book that hasn't explicitly been said. I'd like to state it, and then you improve it or add to it if you would, Jake, just so people will understand the kind of discrimination that's going on. Because you hear the word discrimination and people say, yeah, okay, there were a lot of African Americans, they didn't get promoted, and that probably was discrimination. But the evidence was very vivid in a lot of ways. And one thing that I remember I learned early on in talking with you about this and listening to you about this is that there would be, let's say, an African American pipe fitter who would be given the task of training a new white employee, a new white person that was new to the ship, and what their duties would be and what skills they needed to use. And then after the skilled African American would finish training this new white employee, in many cases, the white employee would be made supervisor of the person who trained them. Do I have that right?
That was very common.
Yeah,
And
I think that's pretty vivid.
One of the things that really bothered John and Willie was the fact that they had trained many young whites when they came to the shipyard, and they wound up being supervised by them.
Right.
Supervised by them.
Right, yeah.
So that was a very common problem on the shipyard.
There was a part about putting a statue there in the park afterwards, years later.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, one of the guys, when we started talking regularly about what we had done, the guys began to realize what I had realized earlier, and that was what we did was very important. At the time, we didn't think it was important. What we were after was to get a pay raise and a promotion. We didn't think about the historical importance of any of it. One of the reasons we didn't keep records. The only ones who kept record was Willie, and he was gone. So that was a real challenge.
There's a point about the historical importance I'd like to hear you say a little bit more about too, Jake. I'm going to put it in my words, but you'll say it better and in maybe a more detailed way. This happened in the early 1960s, shortly after John F. Kennedy had been elected president. When he was elected president, he began to talk about equal rights and employment opportunities for people.
But he didn't carry through.
Pardon?
I said, but he didn't carry through.
Well, I was going to say, it was talk, and I think from what I've learned from you, Jake, that one of the significant things about this particular episode in history is that the 25 of you filed an informal complaint with the Kennedy administration that essentially was demanding that they put their money where their mouth was, so to speak. And not just in terms of the discrimination being carried out by, let's say, some business or corporation, but discrimination being carried out by the United States Navy. So could you say a little bit more about some of the things that came up when you essentially demanded that the Kennedy administration put their money where their mouth was?
Well, Kennedy, my read is that Kennedy really had no intention of putting his money where his mouth was. He said one time that sometimes illusion is more important than reality. And he believed in casting an illusion that he was.
Sounds like Biden.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Worse.
But go ahead, Jake.
And so he set up this committee that we filed a complaint with, but he passed it off to Lyndon Johnson to manage the committee. And I can't remember his name right now, but the black guy who was the legal counsel that I mentioned to really had the responsibility for making it happen. The other challenge was they didn't really enforce what they were supposed to enforce. So we filed a complaint in '61, and it went to the President's Committee, and they sat on it for 2 years. and said, they had a backlog because once people saw us filing a complaint, others filed. And they said they had a backlog. And so it took 2 years before a committee came out from Washington to study what was happening, not study, but to investigate
Investigated.
what happened at Mare Island. And they said up front that they weren't there to prove discrimination. They were there to look at processes. So they never said ultimately that there was discrimination. And in fact, the leadership at Mare Island never admitted discrimination. What they said was it was the result of misunderstandings. And in our case, we said, well, there's no misunderstanding. If I'm paid $3 an hour for what a white man is paid $4 an hour to do, there's no misunderstanding if John Edmondson has been here for 30 years and he can't get a promotion. That's not a misunderstanding. But things did begin to change. Not as fast as some people thought they would, but things began to change so that by 2 years later, when the committee did stay in contact with Willie. They got regular reports from him, but they just filed a report. But by the time we followed through and filed to take the name, the original 21ers, some of my guys had gotten significant promotions. So if you look at who signed it, like Clarence Williams was a mechanic or a journeyman person. 2 years later, he was an inspector. So there was progress being made.
There was some movement.
Yeah, there was movement, absolutely movement being made, and that's what caused the internal strife. Willie wasn't satisfied with that. He was more aggressive, do more. And the guys who were getting the promotions were saying, well, we're being treated more fairly now. So, the resistance was pretty strong, and to this day, they have never admitted that there was discrimination, officially.
Can you speak to the basic Southern culture of the U.S. military? And then also, if you could speak to the local African-American culture that supported you guys, the NAACP, and any churches or community organizations that you were involved in?
We didn't get any support from the local, from the NAACP or other organizations. Now, remember, part of that was because a lot of what we did was in secrecy. So there was no headline in the Chronicle or in the Vallejo Times-Herald about what we were doing. But we didn't really get that much support. I will say that the attorney who worked with us, Mr. Wilson, was very dedicated. He lived in Berkeley, very aggressive politically. He helped us a lot. And he belonged to the Men of Tomorrow, which was an activist organization in Oakland, and the East Bay Democratic Club, I think it was, which was black. And he represented those two organizations. So we got that kind of indirect support, but direct support, we didn't get any.
And the basic military culture you were up against?
The military culture was that the Army at that time and the Navy and I think all the branches of the service was dominated by Southerners. All the officers, or many of the officers, were from the South, and they brought the Southern thinking with it. The two leaders at Mare Island at that time, the naval leaders were from the South, and a lot of the workers had come from the South after the Dust Bowl, and they came here and work in the Valley, the Central Valley, and then they moved on to working in many of the military installations, including Mare Island, and they dominated the leadership in those installations. And
Have they been slave owners too?
maybe the parents were, but they weren't. But they were not sympathetic to the cause, not at all. And but to compound the problem, almost all the workers at that time, including Jake Sloan, I think maybe every one of the 25 who signed the complaint came from the South. Mm-hmm. And that means most of the guys working at Mare Island came from the South. And in the South, they had accepted the kind of practices that were being carried out at Mare Island and were resistant to speak up against them. For good reason that they were afraid of losing their jobs. Mm-hmm. You guys have probably all heard of John Burris, the civil rights attorney. His father worked there.
Really?
Yeah. And he said that John told me that his father never mentioned the problems because, well, he mentioned them, but he was not going to complain because he had 6 children that he had to feed, and he was not going to risk his job for what we were requesting there. And we were treated, some of the guys, not me personally, but some of the guys who signed were treated very, very poorly by African Americans on the shipyard. And they'd go into the cafeteria and they'd call them niggers, and you niggas are crazy, and you're jeopardizing our good life. Because a lot of them, one of the ways they minimized the resistance was overtime. You could work overtime, and some guys worked 7 days a week. They wound up making more money than their supervisors. And they didn't want the overtime jeopardized because overtime was the call of the supervisors. If they didn't want you to work overtime, you didn't work overtime.
Right.
A lot of guys made a lot of money working overtime.
Okay.
So when I remember Eddie on our team saying, I want to make the money without working overtime.
Can you speak a little bit about what the connection was between what was going on in the rest of the country and the civil rights movement in the 60s?
We were very much influenced by the civil rights movement, very much. In fact, Willie Long said something that I'll never forget, and many of the guys were impressed by it, and that is he said that if the guys down south can, risk getting their heads cracked and being killed, something to that effect, I can risk losing this little job. And there was a lot of civil rights activity going on in the Bay Area at the time,
Right.
in San Francisco in particular. So all of that, and there was a lot of activity in Los Angeles area. So
On the UC Berkeley campus.
yeah, so we were very much influenced by the civil rights movement.
So Jake, I want to ask you about lessons to be learned for today from your book and your insights and the insights of the men with whom you work. Could you identify for us 2 or 3 audiences today, groups of people today, that might learn 1 or 2 critical lessons each? What would the groups be? What would be the 1 or 2 critical lessons from your experience?
I say that everyone should learn from the fact that it's important to stand up for what you believe in. That's how I got the title, Standing Tall. I believe the 21 stood tall. Everyone, especially those who are being discriminated against, has to realize that you've got to stand up and demand your rights. Nobody's going to give you your rights just because you deserve them.
Yeah.
I think that's for everyone,
Right.
not any particular group.
I think there's a big connection.
Wait. I want to first, do you have 1 or 2 other implications or insights, lessons that you want to articulate, highlight? I hear that one. Is there 1 or 2 others?
That's the one I learned, and the one that stays with me.
That's the big one.
Stand up.
Okay.
That's the one that stays with me.
Okay.
And it drives everything I do in life.
Okay.
You gotta stand up, speak up for what you believe in, especially when you know you're right.
Right. Seems like there's a big connection to the climate movement now, about, the fossil fuel industry that's ruining the planet, and all the corporations that are pushing their fossil fuels when there's so many people, especially young people, standing up against what's happening in the climate that's jeopardizing their own future in life. And I think about Greta Thunberg, if you've seen her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she has a really good article that's called Grown-ups, You're Acting Like Spoiled Children. And I think, she really says it out loud, and, she sat down in front of the government in her country and refused to go to school because she felt she wasn't going to have a future. And then children all over the world started doing the same thing. And now even Jane Fonda is doing it in Washington, D.C. She's standing in front of the White House every Friday, and Fridays for the Future. And there's a lot of people following it, but,
Well, I think Jake's title, Standing Tall, is a really good one, as you point out. I want to switch gears, but Mark, I want to check with you too if you have some different questions. I don't want us to digress prematurely. Did you want us to go to some of the issues about publication options, or is there some other stuff that we should maybe get into first?
I do have just a couple more questions while we're on the book itself, and then we can move on.
Sure, yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
yeah, so asking, who influenced you, that leads me to ask, what influences or what did your action, and I do want to use the term that you use and that typifies what young people are doing today is direct action. You took a direct action, and how did that ripple out through first the government jobs and other government installations, then out into the culture? How did you see uh, the original 21ers impacting the culture directly?
A couple of the white guys I'll call,
Gray boys.
yeah, well, Willie Long called them gray boys.
I love that term.
It's like you, David,
but-
Gray boy.
A couple of them, all of them resisted in the beginning. In fact, when some of the guys started getting promotions, the white guys refused to work for them. But over time, a couple of them told Clarence and a couple of the other guys that it had really benefited them because it gave them a chance to really get to know the African Americans that they wouldn't have anything to do with before. And one of the guys who was a big time supervisor, he and Clarence Williams would take vacations to Hawaii after that. That never would have happened.
With their extra money?
Excuse me?
With their extra money?
They did okay. So that was a tremendous impact because really they would literally refuse to work for a black leader. But after a while that went away and just a lot of great changes came about, but it didn't happen overnight. Some of when this story first surfaced around 2005, a guy named Matthias Gaffney with the Vallejo Times Herald heard about it and wrote 5 or 6 articles about it. And one of the main themes of the articles was that there was immediate improvement. It was not immediate. It took a while. It was very gradual. And this started in 1961. The shipyard closed in 1996, and some of the problems were still prevailing there, but there was change.
Close to 96?
Closed in 96.
And now it's a university, right?
No, there's a university over there, but there's housing there.
A Jewish university.
Yeah. There's a lot of housing on it, a lot of businesses. It's quite a thriving place now. So the impact was felt by everyone, but there still was a very negative feeling on the part of some. One of the ladies who helped us a lot, who was with the Mare Island Museum, helped us a lot, helped me a lot in writing the book.
Really?
And her husband worked in one of the shops with Boston Banks, who was one of the guys that signed the complaint. And his contention always was that we got promotions that we didn't deserve.
Oh.
And he refused to talk with me. And his wife helped me for 10 years. He refused to talk to me because he felt that we were, it's like some of the guys feel now. That black people are taking jobs that they don't deserve and the jobs that they should have.
They talk about immigrants like that too.
Yeah.
And that leads me to ask who you want to influence with your book, and then we can move into the nuts and bolts of the
I think
publishing.
Marilyn had a question too she wanted to ask Mark, I think. Marilyn,
Where's Marilyn?
she's there.
I put some in the chat, some comments.
Yeah, I'll bring those up as we
Okay.
move along.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so you wrote the book, and we've seen that 40-year process. And who are you hoping to reach with the book? Who do you want to read the book, and where do you want the book placed, for history?
I'll say something that you heard me say before, and we can get back to the monument. I never did get a chance to address that. I didn't write the book to make money. I wrote the book because I want the story to be told. And the quote I have in the book is an old African saying that when an elder dies, a library is burned. When I die, I don't want my library to be totally burned. I want the story of the 21ers to be told forever. These are great men, all had a tremendous influence on me. I want the story to be told. And I would like for it to be told in the colleges and universities, I'd like for it to be told in the labor studies programs, the African American studies programs, but I would like for everyone to hear the story.
It won't be read in Florida, don't worry about
There are ways, people have always read books that they wanted to read somehow.
it. Florida.
Let me just, Mark, answer her question about the monument. After the guys realized how important what we did was, one of them said, we ought to get a monument built for Willie, somewhere on the shipyard. And I said, well, good idea, but I don't think we ought to get the monument built for everybody. Willie's name could be at the top of it, but it should be for everyone. And so I took on the responsibility of making that happen. And it was a long, hard struggle because now the shipyard is controlled by a lot of agencies, and you have to get the approval of every agency that deals with the shipyard to do anything like that.
And the statue was made in China, wasn't it?
It was ultimately made in China because of so many problems getting it made here. So it was made in China, shipped to Tennessee, and then out here to California, and finally installed there. And it was pretty expensive. And a long process of getting it done, but it's one of the things that I'm most proud of that I've done in my life, is get that monument placed there. And when the day the ceremony took place, were you there, John?
Yeah.
Yeah. There were about 80 people there.
Oh, really?
All the sons and daughters and grandchildren of Willie Long and many of the other 21ers. It's a great stone, best thing I've ever done in my life.
Really?
It was hard.
And where exactly is it now?
It's in a little park, the Alden Park. It's a little park, and the park is a monument to all the things that have happened. It recognizes the first commandant there. It recognizes the Marines, the Navy. A lot of things that have happened over the years are all memorialized there. So we're in probably the most important place historically on Mare Island.
And exactly where is is in Richmond or in
No, it's in
Vallejo?
Vallejo. And it's right behind Shop 56. And I didn't talk about Shop 56,
Yeah.
but about a third or more of the people who signed the complaint were from Shop 56, my shop, the pipe fitter shop. And John came from 56, Willie came from 56, Jim Davis, who was very important, came from 56, Charlie Fluker came from 56. The real influence in the group was from Shop 56 and is sitting right behind Shop 56, and I love it. And those guys were so important that Charlie Fluker, in particular, with all of them, were always encouraging me to do better things because I had dropped out of high school in 10th grade. And I probably had a 6th grade education when I dropped out in reality and served in the Army from the time I was 15 to 19. So when we were carpooling, I carpooled with Charlie Fluker and 5 or 6 of the other guys. They were always after me, Jake, get an education. You can do better than this.
Wait, did you enlist when you were 15?
Yeah,
I didn't know that you could enlist before you were 18.
you can if you lie.
If you lie. They don't have to.
I wanted to get out of the environment that I was in. I was living in North Richmond.
It's interesting because just recently we went to the Traverse Base
Travis Air Force Base.
because it's where a lot of the armaments are being sent to Israel. So there was a big protest there, and there were 4 military men guarding the gate. So I just decided to talk to them. I went in and said, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question? We don't have a draft in this country anymore. Can I ask you why you are enlisted in the military?" So one guy says, "Well, we all have different reasons." And then one guy says, "I enlisted to protect this country." And in my mind, I'm thinking, I think there are more countries that need protection from us than we need from other countries. And anyway, it was an interesting day. And as people came in cars to go to work at the military base, and other people went to their windows to talk to them, there were people workers leaving with tears in their eyes when they heard what, they were doing.
Yeah. Well, when I was a young man, African-American man, if you graduated from high school, if you weren't an athlete, so you could get a scholarship to go and play a sport, you didn't have many choices.
Right.
You couldn't, there weren't a lot of jobs available, so you could always join the military and get free food every day if nothing else. And then when you got out, you get the GI Bill, as I did, if you go to school. But I wanted to really emphasize how much importance those guys had on my life.
Mm.
One of the guys, Charlie Fluker, was on me every day. Jake, you got to quit this job because right now you don't have any children, you're not married.
And you're smart.
You know, he said, but if you stay here long enough, you're going to get married, you're going to have children, and then you won't be able to leave. So you got to leave, you go get an education. And that's when I decided that I was going to quit and go to college.
And you went to San Francisco State?
I went first to community college because I had only gone to the 10th grade, remember, and I had a probably 6th grade education. So I had to do a lot of remedial work. I took, I think, 4 classes in English before I got to the level of what they call bonehead.
Wait, what school was that at?
Contra Costa Community College in San Pablo, one of my saviors. But I probably would have never done that if it hadn't been for the influence of those guys. You can't stay here. You got to go.
Good.
In fact, I didn't mention this. The 3 youngest ones were Terrence Williams, Jim Davis, and I, and they were very resistant to us signing the complaint because they didn't think, why would you take a risk at this when you don't really have to? They really pushed back on us. But our thing was, what? Not now, when?
Yeah, no risk right now. Yeah.
So I'm sorry to cut you off, Mark.
That's great. And this talking about the statue reminded me that we really didn't explain. I'd like you to explain. Let me put it this way: I'd like you to explain a little bit about Mare Island, especially for people that watch this later. They won't know that it's an island in the Napa River, for instance, and it was a naval base for more than a century. If you could just say a little bit about Mare Island.
Well, the first buildings were put there in 1856, so it's been a long time. And it was a very, very important part of the war effort in World War II, especially. It was like jumping off point. There were 40,000 people working there during the war, 40,000. Even when I was there were probably 10,000. So it was a very, very important part of the military. And what I worked on was building nuclear submarines, which was a very, very important part of the war effort then and ongoing. I worked on several submarines there.
What do they do with nuclear submarines?
Put them in the water.
In the water?
They put them in the water.
Yeah, I know, and then?
And then they swim.
But I mean, why were they
They're
nuclear?
a very important part of the
They're
military
supposed to
because
blow
they can be very secret, they're in the water. And so they can't be detected. They're very important because even when I was building nuclear submarines, they could fire missiles 6,000 miles with quite a bit of accuracy.
It's part of the Cold War.
Yeah.
Part of the Cold War. So,
Go ahead, John. Go ahead and move on to publishing, if you will.
yeah, okay. Well, so for those that are interested, Jake and also myself, we've had some interesting experiences with the publishing, and I'll just say
You
that,
didn't mention that he was in the doctoral program here.
yeah, Jake was in the WISR doctoral program, and one of the things that's noteworthy about WISR historically is we seem to attract a lot of amazing people, Jake being one really good example, and they often have important things to say based on their life experiences and their encounters with others. Jake's experiences with the group at Mare Island, the 21ers and stuff, is really one example. It's a really good one, but there's been a lot of others. And it's not obvious to most of us, how would we share what we know with others through a book or through some sort of printed material? That's not obvious. I think there's people that are accomplished writers that do it as a living, that learn how to do that. There's people in larger academic institutions that are part of a kind of a well-connected network of academicians that can help one another to figure out how to get published. But for many people, it's not obvious, and that's really true in my case as well, even though I had the good fortune of learning from a lot of people at WISR over the years, going back to 1975 and a few years previously in academia in my own case. So there's the self-publishing route and there's the non-self-publishing route, and I guess I'll say a little bit about both, if that's okay, Jake, and then you add things related to your book.
Absolutely.
The self-publishing route is essentially where you pay somebody to print books or to make an ebook now available online, and then you just have to promote it yourself, but at least it's online and it can be promoted through Amazon. So I came at, when a number of us at WISR wanted to write a series of articles on multiculturalism, which is part of WISR's mission to promote multiculturalism, we went to a group called Book Baby. You can Google it, it's Book Baby, and they'll publish books for you. There's a couple of options. Like one option is, maybe their most comprehensive option is that you give them well-formatted copy that's rated, pretty close to rated being published. You can pay them to edit, but you can probably figure out how to edit stuff yourself. Give them a good, clean copy of what's going to be published, and then they'll print it on demand, they say, for books. And one of the problems with printing a lot of books historically initially is that even people that are really good writers, they may get a publisher to run off whatever, some thousands of the copies of their books, and they'll never sell. I mean, there was, way back in the 1970s, I knew a very well-accomplished writer who was a member of the free speech movement at Berkeley. So he was one of the activists who was a more prolific writer. He'd get his books reviewed in the New York Review of Books and so forth, named Michael Rossman, wrote some really good books. I found out from him that in reality, most of his books didn't sell. He didn't get much money from them. He just had an attic full of his books. Never, never most of which. But the books had received pretty good publicity, but apparently they still didn't really necessarily sell. So when Book Baby publishes on demand, essentially you pay them an upfront fee. The writer or the writers for a book, as WISR did with the Book Baby one, and I'm not sure if it's maybe the route that you did also with your book for a while, you pay them a fee of $2,000 to several $1,000s, and they will do several things. So one, make an ebook available if you buy that part of the package, and the ebook can be distributed, and then they'll tell Amazon and Barnes and Noble and a few other key people, they'll do a modest amount of marketing for you. Got to do any heavy duty marketing, but they'll do some basic marketing, and there'll be an ebook available, and people can get the ebook, and you set the price on the ebook in this one option where you get most of the royalties. A little bit goes to Amazon or whoever, but not very much. If the book sells for $3, maybe you get over $2 for each ebook sold. Don't think you're going to get wealthy that easy doing that, but you can do that as an option. And then whenever anybody wants to buy a print book, let's say it's publicized on Amazon, they'll print up enough to send out. So they'll print out a few at a time or a couple dozen at a time. So it doesn't cost Book Baby a lot, and you don't get as much profit from the print version. But basically, you pay for a service to make your book available on Amazon and other places as an ebook and or a print book. You get a little bit of the profit, especially from the ebook, a little bit from the print book, and it's made available to people. So it's a pretty good way to get your thing out. The other option is, and it kind of involves some networking to get some major publisher to publish your book. So Mark mentioned earlier that I had a couple books in 2021 published by Routledge Press. I probably wouldn't have even put forth the effort to contact Routledge had it not been for Brian Gerard, who's in on the seminar, who had published through Routledge before, and he gave me a contact there. And I contacted the editor at Routledge, and they reviewed my manuscript and thought that they could publish it, so they did. And they promote it. They don't really promote it a lot, but they promote a little bit. It goes on Amazon, and I think even the one through Routledge, I don't think it's not like certainly not even close to bestseller. In fact, maybe it's probably high on the worst seller list. But, I suppose after it's been out for almost 3 years now. Each book maybe is probably sold somewhere.
Well, how many colleges focus on participatory
But
action research?
the point is how many people want to buy it. So the point is, even with a major publishing house like Routledge publishing the book, I'm going to estimate that there's been maybe a few hundred copies of each book sold. Don't think in terms of thousands, think in terms of more than 200 and less than 900. But that's a good route if you can get somebody at one of those publishing houses to take your manuscript seriously. Writing is the bigger problem, and the only reason I was able to write 2 books was that I was quarantined in my house during COVID for a while, as most people were, and so I thought I would do what I should have done 10 years sooner and write.
But you had a lot of people writing chapters for you too.
I had a few, not a lot, but a few. You did write a chapter. I wrote most of it. I did have a few others, including yourself. Thank you.
Good, it's a good book. I read it a lot.
But anyway, so those are the 2 basic options. Jake, what do you want to say about your experience with both of those options?
First, I want to say that John is right about the number, maybe high. I read somewhere that the average good history book will sell 200 copies.
Really?
Yeah.
200.
Yeah.
So, you're not going to make any money. I went the self-publishing route the first time because I thought that was the easiest route to go. And it was pretty easy. But I wanted to do what I said earlier, and that is get the books in as many hands as I could. And you don't, unless you're very good at it and you got a lot of money to spend, you're not going to get the books in a lot of hands self-publishing. You can get to a good publisher, they've got reach to go to the United States and maybe even Europe. So I always wanted to get a real publisher to do it. And also because I belong to a fraternity that's the oldest and most prestigious Black fraternity. And they have a journal.
What's it called? Fraternity?
The fraternity is F Sigma Phi Phi, Boule. You never heard of it because it's extremely.
Everything is signified.
Yeah, well, but it's extremely secretive.
Okay.
Until recently, they don't. If you belong, you don't want anybody to know. But anyway, they have this great journal, and I wanted to get a book review. Well, they're so snooty that unless you published by a publisher, they won't do a book review. So I was thinking, well, I'm going to somehow get a publisher. And the other reason again was the reach. The downside of a publisher is they're in control. When we did the first edition, I didn't like it for a lot of reasons, all the blame on me. So I got together with Mark and another editor who I had worked with on an article for this magazine to rewrite it. And we rewrote it, and I think we did a great job.
Oh,
So
wow.
I finally convinced this publisher to publish, but they wanted to hire their editor to edit it. And I don't know what you have to say about it, but I don't like the way it was edited and organized. I simply don't. Maybe it'll sell, maybe it won't.
I thought it was really good.
That's the downside.
I
They're
couldn't
in
put it
control.
down.
I said, I think you guys got the table of contents in the wrong place. They said, take it or leave it, basically. And I said, you guys reorganized it. You've got some things at the beginning of the book that I had at the end of the book. I don't like that. I know what I'm doing. I know the subject.
Mm.
And by the way, don't change any of the dialect that I'm using in it. That's the way the people talk. Nope, you take it or leave it. So that's the downside, but they have the reach. They can sell books all over the country. And
I'll just interject quickly. That can vary from publisher to publisher, because my experience with Routledge was that they didn't do much that was different than I wanted. They made some fine-tuning edits and so forth.
And they changed your book into 2 books rather than 1.
Well, they recommended it be 2, which was actually a good suggestion, So that was the biggest thing that they said. They said it was too long for 1 book, but I could make it into 2 books. So I said, okay, that's fine by me. But that was about the only, thanks for reminding me of that, Sadia. That was about the only big thing that I was asked to do that was different. So I think I'm just interjecting that because that may vary from publisher to publisher how much control they try to exert.
it also varies by subject. They didn't want to publish this book. I had to really lean on them. They said it's a great story, Jake, but all the people who were involved are dead. And by the way, all but Clarence and I are dead. were the last two. They're dead.
There's a lot
All
of books
the-
about dead people.
Yeah, the world is full of dead people. But what they were saying is that,
That's their marketing angle on it.
well,
probably.
they said all the people who were involved in it, all of their relatives are either dead or they're very old and they're not interested in the subject. So, you know, not much of a market for it. I agree with it. So ultimately, the only reason I got them to publish it was because they thought it was a good story and I would have to subsidize part of the cost. But,
Did you ever get royalties on it?
royalties? Remember what I said?
Every time they sell a book, they're supposed to give you a
This is
royalty.
a history book. The average sales is 200. I think I'll do pretty well over time because Mark and I have been able to line up some people to work with us who really know how to get the
Really?
word out and
Really?
publicize the book, and that helps.
Yeah, actually, my doctoral thesis was published as a book because the head of my program pushed me to an editor. And then it was Lawrence Earlbaum, and there was another one that changed over to Lawrence Earlbaum. And it was used, actually, it seemed to have been used in almost every teacher education program. Because I would go to conferences, I'd be sitting next to someone and they'd see my name tag. They'd say, oh, your book is our student's favorite book. But then every year the royalties were coming in, and the book's like 20 years old.
Yeah.
And this year I got like, I don't know, a $400 check. I thought, really? It's still being sold? I couldn't
Comes a
believe it.
blessing. I want to say this. I never would have written this book. I was talking about all the reasons I wrote it. I never would have written it, not for John.
Mhm.
Because what I had in mind originally was I was going to do a paper for WISR, and I was going to get it bound and give it to the family members of the 21ers because they never heard the story. I was thinking of writing a story for them. And John said, why don't you write a book?
Yeah, good idea, John.
I never thought of it.
I think a
Good
lot
book.
more people should write books, and that's probably why it's good to know about Book Baby, because it is, I'm not saying it's necessarily the best option always, but it is a viable option for self-publishing that doesn't cost more than, they can do an ebook for about $1,000, but if you want an ebook and print on demand, it's going to be $3,000-4,000, and then you get some royalties. You probably aren't going to make all the $3,000 or $4,000 back, but you might. But you can publish what you want to publish, like you're
Right.
saying, Jake, without them meddling too much in the content or the format. And it can be a pretty good process for getting. And WISR had people. Your work is especially outstanding, but we've had other people do outstanding work. We had the two students,
Coffey.
Dennis Hastings and Marjorie Coffey, did this amazing, distinctive history of the Omaha people in the face of the European invasion, with a lot of drawings and maps besides text. Their problem with their book is, in terms of getting it published, if they were to go to Book Baby, there's so many drawings and maps and the like, graphics, it would cost too much. They'd have to pay Book Baby $20,000 or
Really?
more.
Who is Book Baby?
It's a group that publishes books. It's
Yeah.
called Book Baby. But the point is, if you have a lot of graphics, a lot of drawings, illustrations, maps, etc., or photographs that you want incorporated, which Dennis and Marjorie do. So they're still trying to find a way to get somebody to publish their book because, well, Dennis has passed away now, but Marjorie's still alive. Dennis passed away a year ago. The effort to get that book published has been challenging because it's so costly for anybody, any publisher, whether it's doing it for you or a major company. It's almost like they need a grant.
Because of the pictures and maps and
Yeah,
stuff?
it's so costly when you're, even in an ebook, I mean, especially in a print book, but even in an ebook, it can be very, very expensive. And so that's a separate issue. If somebody has something that they want to do that has graphics involved, photos, illustrations, maps, that sort of thing, that's an extra problem. But if it's mostly print with just, a few drawings or photographs, then Book Baby can be a pretty economical option. And getting a referral to a major publisher, like I was very fortunate that Routledge, the group that Brian had dealt with, that he suggested I contact, they were, for whatever reasons, interested in the two books that I wanted to write, and they were cooperative, and not like I'm making an arm and a leg. I get my $400 a year check too, you know, and it's about what it is for 2 books.
Count your blessings.
You
Some
know,
years I
right.
got $500 and
You know,
$600.
You know, so, yeah, well, mine isn't exactly a bestseller, but anyway, but the point is that it is a way to get the word out. And I did cut some deals with Rutledge, like I cut a deal with Rutledge that anybody who enrolls as a student at WISR gets a free
You got me,
ebook,
remember?
you know, of both books.
Even faculty.
Yeah, and I just lie and say faculty or students, I kind of lie.
Okay, I guess that's
But,
why I got mine.
Yeah, that's how you got yours.
I'd
Anyway.
like to.
You had some
I'd like
more
to
questions?
interject.
You had some more questions, I think, or Marilyn had a couple of questions?
Yeah, and then Mark on the interview. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd like to interject something here as we sort of wrap up this section and move on to the questions. So I come at this from a different point of view. I've been a bookseller off and on since I was a teenager.
Bookseller?
Bookseller. Yep. That's an actual job title.
Meaning
And
what? Work in a bookstore?
in bookstores, that's where you sell books. Well, that's where you used to sell books. That's sort of my point here that I'm getting to. And, you know, I've worked in new bookstores. I've worked in used bookstores. And so to John's point about having an attic full of books, if people will remember back in the old days, a new bookstore would have a remainder table. And that's where all those books that didn't sell would go, and you could buy them for 99 cents.
Okay.
So, but we
Yeah,
moved
the
on
Costco.
beyond that. And I helped close 2 of the best bookstores in the Bay Area, Books Inc. in the Stanford Shopping Center, and Moon Books in Half Moon Bay, which was owned by a man with a literature degree. And, you know, it had wood floors and couches, and we did events, and, you know, it was just wonderful. But Amazon just put everybody out of business, basically.
Everybody out of business and everything.
And so one of the reasons that I discovered in looking into publishing now, you know, from a contemporary point of view, is when the last bookstore I worked in, all of our books came through Ingram. Just like everything else, the publishing distribution has consolidated. And it used to be you had 10 distributors that would come and give you free books and talk to you and take you out to lunch and all that. And it's ended up to be basically one, Ingram. And so that's where the new bookstores get all their books. But it's also where the libraries and the college libraries get their books. And this is what I discovered in doing the research around publishing standing tall. So another reason to go with a publisher for Jake is that the historic Black colleges and universities, for instance, and all the other colleges and universities had no way to buy his book. You know, institutionally, they're not allowed to buy self-published books. They can only buy through the major distributors, which is now we're down to one, Ingram. And so by having this book published, it's in the Ingram catalog. And so that will allow us, allow Jake to go and make presentations at colleges and conferences. And then in turn, the librarians and the faculty can turn around and order this book. And so that was a really important part of moving to a regular publisher, as well as getting a review in the Boulay Journal, which is out apparently, but we haven't quite seen it yet. And so I just wanted to mention that part of it. I mean, it's self-publishing, as John mentioned, is accessible to people. In fact, you don't have to go to BookBaby. You can go directly to Amazon, KDP or whatever. They have something, KD Publishing.
Stay away from Amazon.
So there are many ways to go about it. But this was really important for Jake to be able to get his book in the hands of the people that he wanted to, which is the faculty and the college libraries. So
That's what I meant about the reach. They've got the reach to get to people and institutions that I would never be able to get to otherwise.
Ingram?
exactly,
Anybody.
Yeah, and
yeah, the publisher.
I'll
And,
quickly,
you know,
sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was
Sorry.
just going to say that, you know, most people say, well, I never heard of Arcadia Press, so, you know, how big can they be? And just to share, they're the publisher that makes those sepia tone covered little local history books. So like there's one on Berkeley, there's one on Oakland, there's one on Richmond. and you see them all over the place. I was in Rite Aid 2 days ago, and there was the Arcadia Publishing Whittier History of Whittier book on the counter by the checkout stand. So it's like chewing gum. It's an impulse buy. So Arcadia is a large publisher. They're just not, well known. But that's who Jake went with, and they do those picture books under Arcadia, and then History Press is the actual imprint that published Jake's book. Those are the non-picture books.
He has a lot of photographs in his too.
Yeah, he does, but it's not just photographs. So that's how Arcadia handles things. But anyway, they are quite well known, and between their publisher and then Jake and I have found a publicist, excuse me, to help publicize the book. So we're going to sell more than 900 copies. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, cool.
So
Thank you.
if we can move on and get some
Yeah, I just
questions
want to
from
interject,
the,
Art,
Go
I just want to interject real quickly. As of 5 years ago, Amazon was a huge ripoff compared to Book Baby in terms of self-publishing, unless it's changed.
There's still
There's still
a
a
problem with
ripoff.
everything. As a matter of fact, they
I
even
stay away from
own
them.
Whole Foods now, and if you go to Whole Foods and you talk to the checker and you say, what do you think of your boss?
Well, that's
The
different.
answer is,
I'm not
he
doing-
should stay on the moon.
I'm not doing generic Amazon trashing, even though they might deserve it. I'm just saying
They deserve it.
specifically with the publishing, they weren't good 5 years ago. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah.
Mark.
no, and there's many other platforms. And for my particular interest, there's some open source ones. Pressbooks is you can self-publish with free and open source software, but then you have no support. So, but that's another way to go. But I think we've talked enough about publishing. I was hoping that some of the people on the Zoom would ask some questions. You just go ahead and
I have
ask
some
away.
comments.
Marilyn had questions?
I've been collecting in the chat comments and didn't know when it was time. But the first one was, and Mark kind of said it, but I'll just go through these. I was just thinking who in what situations in life would most benefit from hearing this story about your work, your movement on Mare Island. I would think Mark, the labor union people, people, in large corporations at Amazon. And so that was just what I was getting at there, and just food for thought there, I guess. And then, I helped with one version of Jake's book in Book Baby. I helped produce that, and then I read it finally, and I really enjoyed it. By the time I got to the end, the kicker is right at the end. I think are the best parts. So it pays to get through to the end. I recommend it. And also, I was wondering how the latest version was different. I think that's kind of been answered here, but there's not necessarily new content. It was done to publish in a different format. I understand that. And also, I was wondering, what about Jake? What your experience at WISR was most helpful to pursue this research? And you mentioned John. Was there anything about the style of learning at WISR? That there's a food for thought there. And I think the team collaboration is another theme that I appreciate in the book, how the group was close and talked to each other regularly and carefully planned this out and supported each other. You're asking about themes, and that was when I picked up. Point is, what
She froze.
Oh, they agree.
younger people? So getting something out into in video media. So thanks for listening. Yeah.
And I will say, Marilyn, that the support I got from WISR, from you, John, I met Mark through you guys, was priceless. I don't know if I would have gotten through this without the help from the beginning until now. WISR has been very, very helpful.
Yeah, it takes a village. Marilyn, you froze for a minute there. So Jake didn't get all of your question about, have you thought about making a documentary?
Have I thought about it?
Yeah, my
Yeah.
internet's terrible.
Look at his eyes popping out.
No, I hadn't thought about it, but whatever it takes to get it in the hands of the readers.
Okay,
a
well,
video?
that's the same
Well,
reaction.
actually, I've been hoping that someone would come to me and say, Jake, this is a great story and I'll make a documentary.
Of course, you need
I
to
think
use
you need to make it happen. It's not as hard as it used to be. The tools are out there, and Mark would have to help you think about that.
I'll be following up with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who's the fellow that did stuff through New College that came to WISR lunch a number of years ago?
Right.
Remember his name? Maryland?
I don't remember offhand. Sadia probably knew him, but we have that somewhere. Yeah.
So
There was a
Jake,
guy.
that reaction from Jake, he had the same reaction when we had our first meeting with the publicist we're working with. And about 2 minutes into the meeting, she said, "Have you got this in the hands of Barack Obama yet?" And Jake had that same reaction, like, "Why didn't we think of that?" So we're working on it.
Mail him a copy.
We're working on it.
I have a question, if I may. Is this interrupting the
Please.
flow, Mark?
No, please.
So, Jake, one of the questions that John asked you earlier was, what is it that you want to get out? And you got really, really animated when you started talking about stand tall. That's the message that I want to get out. And as you said that, I thought, actually, you started to say some other thoughts like stand tall. And I'm really interested in the kinds of thoughts that you use to motivate yourself to keep going, especially under these kinds of circumstances that are just astounding to me, that you would push through the cultural bias and the fears and all the things that you were up against. You had to have some really powerful thinking going on in your mind that would keep you going. Are there other thoughts other than just stand tall that you found particularly empowering to yourself in this process, not just of writing the book, but your life of standing up for what it is that you believe in?
Well,
No, by the way, I am talking about specific thoughts that empower you.
what empowered me to write this book was I had deep admiration, continue to have deep admiration for John Edmondson and Willie Long and all the other 23 guys that were part of this group. I had a lot of great experience in life, met a lot of great people. That's the greatest group of guys that I've ever met. And they have had tremendous influence on me. So every time I got lazy, I thought, I got to tell this story about John and the guys because it's important for people to have that story. And the other is, they made me what I am in many ways. My father was a great influence on me, but these guys made me who I am. And what they made was, don't give up. Don't ever give up.
Got it. Thank you.
If I could follow up with that, we didn't talk about your career, Jake, that after you graduated from San Francisco State, you didn't go off to become a writer. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done with your life besides writing Standing Tall?
I have, in one way or another, dedicated my life to helping to integrate the building trades, to get more African Americans into the building trades and retained in the building trades. In one way or another, since I left Maryland, I've worked on that because all the while I was going to school, I was working. I had jobs working in community-based organizations that were focused on integrating the building trades, because many of the guys who were working at Mare Island as pipe fitters, for example, couldn't join the plumbers union. We were doing anything the plumbers do. We couldn't join the plumbers union. If you did, it would cost you $1,500, and we were making $3,000 a year. So my life has been devoted to getting African Americans into the building trades and retained in the building trades and building political and economic power for African Americans.
Hey, I
And so
found
I did that with a program that I started with way back when was training African Americans on the job to get into the building trades. And then after that, I worked for the Oakland Unified School District to make sure that African-American workers and contractors got a fair share of the work when they were doing an earthquake safe program. What an earthquake safe program is, I don't know. But they spent a lot of money on it, and I worked there as an employee, and then later I worked as a
You
consultant.
strengthen the foundation so the building doesn't fall down.
In fact, I've worked with the Oakland Unified School District doing that kind of work off and on since the 70s, believe it or not. But I was always an employee, and then about 40 years ago, I decided that if I can do this stuff for other people, I can do it for myself. So I started a labor management consulting business, and that business, I've done the same kind of thing, but on a larger scale, basically dealing with the unions for agencies. So I've worked with the Port of Oakland, Alameda County, City of Oakland, BART, I worked all over the state for school districts for the last 40 years or so. But it's always been about addressing the same issue that we addressed at Mare Island, and that's fairness for African Americans, but in the building trade. So everything I've done has always been related to the construction industry. Mm-hmm. And then I taught for a little while, taught history.
Where?
At Contra Costa College.
I found that Doug Harris is the filmmaker. I put the PDF from the event back in February of 2015. We had a wonderful program by him, and he's African-American filmmaker that went to New College. So I think you could just do one to start with yourself and then reach out, but you could try getting someone, maybe you could just get someone like that to do it right away.
Are there any other questions for Jake?
I know Doug.
Okay, yeah, because
You know Doug, okay?
I know Doug very well.
Okay, well, he'd be a good one to contact.
He made a great documentary about North Richmond, where I grew up.
Okay,
Yeah.
You went to New College?
It's good.
North Richmond.
He was affiliated somehow with New College, I'm not sure.
He got a master's. It says on the flyer. You can look. It's in the chat there.
Yeah, Doug Harris is the guy I was thinking of.
Yeah, I know Doug very well.
Trying to think of who he was. I know.
So-
New
I'll
College.
email it to some of you.
Anyway, that's good that you know. I'd contact Doug.
Yeah, I know him very well.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right. I think that would
John?
be fun, and reach more people.
Also, if you
Anymore?
need any equipment, I have an ex-boyfriend who was a filmmaker, and he told me he was never going to make a film again, so he brought to me all of his equipment.
All
which is
right.
in the basement. So
No, that's all changed now, the
he
technology.
says
though.
I have to give it to a young person who's making socially important
The
films.
way things are changing, you probably have it in the right place if it's in your attic.
Right.
Mark,
My
you were going to
basement.
say something, Mark?
Well, I was just going to try to bring it back to your conversation with Jake if there aren't any other questions. If you want to, one of the topics in the promotional materials was the issue of social justice, which, as Jake just explained, that's been his career. And that is also the mission of WISR. So if you guys could spend a few minutes, I'd appreciate it. Talking about the bigger picture. And Sudhia asked, how does this relate to today's movements as you see them?
Let me just give you one example how it relates. I have a consulting business, and I've worked with the Port of Oakland for 20 years, more than 20 years, on project labor agreements. What project labor agreements are master labor agreements that cover large projects. I provide the service of negotiating those agreements and then managing them, and also assuring that workers are paid properly, called prevailing wage. So I've done it for them for 20 years. I still get treated differently than the white consultants. I can be, my contract can be on the agenda, and a contract goes up before me for $20 million. There's no discussion. My contract comes up for, whatever it is, it ain't 20 million. Then there's all kinds of discussion about due diligence. Did we do our due diligence on Jake? Why isn't his price lower than it is? On and on and on. So what we faced at Mare Island was a challenge of getting paid properly for working job, $4 instead of $3. Here at the professional level, and it's not just me, all the African American professionals, we are always pressured to do the work cheaper than white firms. all day to day. So I tell people all the time, the challenges haven't changed, they're just the form of them. Now, instead of them not wanting to pay workers properly, they don't want to pay professionals properly. I know how to do the work as well as anyone. I don't want to belabor this, but this is a sore spot with me. A few years ago, East Bay Mud put out a request for proposals for a firm to negotiate and then manage a project labor agreement. And they had very specific minimum requirements. I probably was the only firm that proposed that met all the minimum requirements. So when it came time, they said, well, we'll take you to do this work, but you got to use, I won't call his name, the guy who, he's a lawyer, but he learned everything he knows from me.
Oh, God.
They say, we'll give it to you if you use him, and he's got to be the lead.
And he got you what?
He's going to be the lead, you know.
Okay.
If you got two consulting firms together, one of them has to be the lead. He's got to be the lead. You can be on it, but he's got to be the lead. And you know, they didn't say it, but they were going to pay him at the rate of about $400 an hour and me $200.
Yeah, God.
So that's what I face every day, and it's not just me. I mean, Mark knows, he's worked with me off and on for years. I know what I'm doing. I do this business very well. I've survived at it for 40 years. Don't want to brag, but nobody knows the business any better than I do. But there's always a hassle about how much they're going to pay me.
The more things change.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
It's
there's another
frustrating.
thing.
I hear that. You're frustrated.
One comment I would make about social justice and relating it to Jake's book is, and this isn't diminishing his book, it's just using it as an especially good example of what I would call ordinary people doing really significant things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and I don't mean ordinary in a diminishing way, but I mean ordinary in the sense that there are people whose names aren't on the headlines of newspapers, just like
Everyday people.
everyday people, you know, like all of you that were working, you know, you weren't, when you were doing what you were doing back then, you weren't on the front page of the paper of these guys are, you know, trying to get justice for African Americans on Mare Island that are pipe fitters or whatever. So I had an idea a number of years ago that I think was a good idea, but it didn't pan out because the person that was facilitating it didn't really, wasn't able to follow through well. The idea was to have a weekly radio show, I guess now it would be a podcast, but a weekly radio show where I would interview ordinary people who've done something significant that would be of note to other people, you know, for social justice. Because there's a lot of ordinary people that do significant things, and they're not ordinary in the sense that they're unimportant or not significant or not intelligent or not capable.
It's not
They're
famous.
ordinary because they're not famous, that's right. They're ordinary because they're not like in the headlines. I mean, somebody who maybe gets some recognition, and Jake knows her, and I know her a little bit, less than him, it's Margaret Gordon.
Yeah.
You know, Margaret Gordon, an African-American woman in her 70s at West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, does a lot of stuff, and I'm sure some people in Oakland know of her, but she does a lot of stuff, and I'm sure that people have no idea about many of the things that she accomplishes, who should know about it, you know, at least. And there's probably others that are even less well-known than Margaret Gordon that are doing, you know, equally significant things. And so I think the theme for me of enabling people who are not getting a lot of public recognition and notoriety to have their voices heard, to have their stories told, so that this is an important story, to have those stories made accessible and known to people so that we can learn more from them.
So when are you going to start your radio program, Joe?
Well, you know, I'm now that I'm retiring more, I don't know if I want to take on new things, but actually if somebody was going to facilitate that happening in a way that was more meaningful than what happened before, that's an idea that I with others could do, you know, and it's just like one idea, and I'm not even saying that the radio program or the podcast was the, you know, the neatest thing since sliced bread, but the idea of having some vehicles to more consistently get out the stories of people who are doing significant things who otherwise aren't well known.
Talk to some people at
Is-
KPFA.
Well, like I say, I'm not in initiative mode right now. I'm in the mode of giving people ideas and they can run with it, with
Okay.
me being a cheerleader or something at this point. But anyway, that's just, I think your book is a really good example of what more people should be given assistance to do that and find vehicles. The documentary film idea is good. Even having an interview with people on a podcast or something is another idea.
My next book, John, along that line, I think,
Oh, you're gonna write next one.
yeah, more than one, I hope. But I don't know if books are the best vehicle for getting the word out on anything anymore. I don't see books being a major vehicle.
Well, they're okay, but
They're
it's other
okay.
things.
Have you read Bernie's new book?
Bernie who?
Bernie Sanders. It's a
So
really good book.
my next book is going to be about the people that I grew up with in Richmond. Everyone who's still alive that I grew up with, and I knew a lot of guys. I'm the kind of person who knows everybody. I'm going to write a book about the guys that I grew up with who never got any kind of fame in life, but were great people, took care of their families, made
That's kind of what I'm
contributions to the
talking about.
community. I'm going to interview everyone that's still alive.
That's great.
And a lot of people who
Sounds
went
like-
into the political stuff in Richmond too were really,
Well, for example, George Livingston, who was prior mayor, he was working at Mare Island when I was there.
Oh, really?
We did it and refused to sign, by the way.
oh,
You know, there was a moderately well-known, in some circles, sociologist who did interviews that did a little bit of that. Studs Terkel did some of that sort
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah,
Getting-
and storytelling. It's storytelling and oral history. There are oral history projects like I think Berkeley Historical, maybe the Richmond, the Rosie Riveter Museum. I don't know if they have an oral history project, but that would be a place. Have you given a talk over there?
No.
Yeah, that's a wonderful.
Yeah, I know very well.
You know, but it's we're in this new. Marcus keeps reminding us that like I'm on Facebook, but he tells me that's an older generational thing now, and I'm having trouble understanding these short videos that come out even on YouTube or TikTok. I'm just not into that. But the younger generations are running with telling their story. Everybody's telling their story. We're flooded with it. But I think remember late Bob Blackburn said that relationships are important with people, that education is about relationships. And I think that relates to what your book was about too.
By the way, I think that there's incredible stories and talks on YouTube. I follow a lot of it and just really good news stories, really good talks by activists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
What, you
all-
watch YouTube, Sadia? That's owned by Google. I can't believe you watched that.
I think all the media you guys are talking about now are the reason that books are not going to be a real important part of messaging
In the future.
in the future.
I watched something on PBS that I liked. It was called Hotel Portofino. I enjoyed it, and then I wanted to read the books. I read the book for the first season, and it was almost the same. And I got the feeling maybe they wrote it knowing that the show was coming out, and it was just almost to the T what the film was about. So I think both are good, but you don't need to do just one, but need to do all of it. Maybe.
So there's a term for what's going on. It's called media convergence.
Mm-hmm.
And what you just said, Marilyn, so the script writers write the script,
Yeah.
then the movie gets made,
Mm-hmm.
then a different kind of writer comes in and writes a book
Yeah.
based on the movie. And
And then
then
a game is
the
developed.
influencers take bits and pieces and put it all over social media to drive sales. So I don't keep saying that it's a new media environment or it's a new world or whatever to make people feel old.
Yeah.
I keep saying that because there are more ways for us to communicate.
Right.
And the problem, the social problem or challenge, to get away from that word problem, the social challenge is that we now have so many channels that there's no way to reach everybody. So it's not like Walter Cronkite on the nightly news,
Mhm.
where everybody either saw it or heard about it. Now people self-select into these different channels, and the challenge of publicity, I'm learning, is you're chasing around these different channels to find the different audiences. So, of course, some of the channels, you're wasting your time. For Jake's book in particular, or for WISR's publications, or anything that we've talked about today, you'd be wasting your time. But you have to find where your people are, and what channels they use, and then focus on those. And that's the challenge.
Universities.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me, Mark, when you talk about being old, because the alternative is not attractive.
Yeah.
That's it.
Which is
That's-
being young or being a baby, or wearing diapers, like.
No, I know what Jake's talking about.
Actually, I get a lot of things coming to my YouTube, but one of them is they're telling ways to prevent Alzheimer's disease. And one of them is you have to read a lot. The next is you have to dance. And the third is you have to play board games. Now, we read a lot, and as a matter of fact, I like real books because I like to get under the covers at night and read real books until I finally fall asleep. And
But
dancing.
with a laptop, you don't need a flashlight.
Oh,
Come on.
God, I don't take my laptop into bed. We don't take any electronics into bed. And if there's a blue light in my bedroom, I turn off whatever the blue light is. But so the third thing, reading, dancing, which we do every night before we go to bed. We do salsa dancing, and we do a memory exercise to end our salsa. So anyone who has problems with memory, you take your thumb, your forefinger, you cross it over your chest, and you do 12 deep knee bends. And the third thing is to play board games. We do not play board games, except my husband just bought a super large size of a Scrabble game, which we intend to play with our grandchildren. And I remember when my kids were little and we would play it, and my youngest kid spelled everything wrong, we said that he was allowed, because he was young, we called it inventive spelling.
So there are two things that indicate that you're getting old. The first one is you start, your memory is fading. The second one
Just
is
do this. Do that exercise every night after you dance.
So we're bringing this thing in for a landing here. So I'm going to ask first John and then Jake, any closing remarks for today's WISR seminar?
My quick closing remark would be just highlight the real importance of getting stories out, like the story that Jake's told. It's really important. Books is one vehicle, only one, probably still a good vehicle, but using others. Getting the word out of these not so famous people doing really, really valuable things.
My closing remark is, if you believe in something, stand tall, stand up for it.
Yay.
Okay, like that.
And my
That's
closing
a
one
good
is, we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. Just like
John,
the
you
children
promised.
That's standing by the
I know why, I only have so much control over the universe.
We shall not be moved.
I got a job.
Okay,
I have a job for her.
so Mark's concluding here.
Yep.
Thank you,
So
Jake.
I'm sharing my screen again. For future viewers is the point of this slide, obviously. Here's the titles of the books and some places you can find them. Again, because of the publishing environment and the way everything's changed, Ingram, that company that I mentioned, has a nonprofit book distributing online company that competes with that other one that we're not going to mention, called bookshop.org. And so well, to me and to Jake, I think, would agree with me, the attractive thing about it is when you put your book there, that you can direct 10% of the sales to a local independent bookstore. And so we promote bookshop.org for online sales. And for in-person sales, Marcus Books in Oakland, right, Jake?
Right.
Oakland. So Jake is directing 10% of his online sales through bookshop.org to support Marcus Books in Oakland. And so, for all the negative or not so good things that go on online, there are some good things, and bookshop.org is one of them. And we hope to have Jake give an author event at Marcus Books, and we'll certainly let everybody know. And as we've discussed, John's books are available through Routledge, and I checked, and they're available through that other company. I didn't check bookshop.org, but I'm going to guess that they're there too, because typically once a book gets distributed, they put it across all of the platforms, as we say these days. And so here's a nice closing slide with the information for the Western Institute for Social Research, that anybody that finds this video and is interested, they should go to WISR's website, www.wisr.edu, and check out WISR's educational offerings. And there's the phone number for WISR for, I won't say that, to just call and find out. And then if you have any questions about this video or any technical questions, I'm always available.
Okay, and Mark, I want to quickly say you did a great job of organizing and facilitating this.
Great job.
And maybe have you do some more like this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great
And
job.
also, can I
Great
add
job.
that anyone who's interested in just expanding their ways of thinking or getting an additional degree that's going to help them out there in the world, the 3 degrees that are offered by WISR, like I did my doctorate at the famous university in San Francisco, and I can honestly say that the doctoral program at WISR is maybe 10 times broader and 10 times deeper than anything I did at the Jesuit University in San Francisco. Okay.
And I just want to thank
Thank
Jake, for pushing to have our first in-person event in I don't know how long. So you pushed for it to happen. I'm glad it was this weekend.
Well, I enjoyed it very much.
Good.
Thanks,
Big applause.
Everybody.